Good morning. It's good to be back. What has it been, 2 weeks since I was here? So hope you guys had a nice little vacation away from me. I don't know. This morning, we're going to get right into it because we may have a lengthy sermon. I'm going to try not to make it too long. But what we're going to be doing in this sermon is laying some groundwork for sermons I've got planned here in the next 2 weeks. It's supposed to be just two, but this one, I cut this one in half. So this will be a study in Isaiah. And you notice here, where the title is Deutero-Isaiah. Okay, so Deutero-Isaiah. So we'll be looking at Isaiah chapters 40 through 55. We're not going to be reading all of them. We'll be looking at a few highlights from these. So the Deutero-Isaiah, the section of Isaiah here, 40 through 55, is referred to as Deutero-Isaiah or second Isaiah. Okay, so the root word deutero is from the Latin, and if you think of it as do or duo, right? So second, all right? The number two or next. So as in the book Deuteronomy, of course, right? So, of course, deutero meaning second, and in Deuteronomy, nomos coming from the Latin root meaning law, a way, a custom, the way one should go, mannerisms. So Deuteronomy very literally means the second law or after law. I like to think of it as Bible case law. But anyway, Deutero-Isaiah. So that's because this section of Isaiah actually forms a distinct theological unit within the book of Isaiah, which is very, very interesting. So we know that Isaiah is obviously addressed to Israelites. Of course, we know the time is 6th century BC, and these Israelites during this time of Isaiah were exiled to Babylon. And there are a few key elements and focal points in these chapters. Okay, one of the few key elements is comfort, restoration, and a return from the exile. Okay? So this brings a message of hope to the Israelites. And of course, we also have the Assyrian captivity as well, right? Which will occur during this time. Now, we also know that Jeremiah and Isaiah do mention both, but they are focused one over the other. So there are a few key things to keep in mind as we look at these chapters here, because it is a lot of ground to cover. We're not even going to, I think we're going to get to chapter 43. That's it. Okay? So from a historical context, so this occurs at the time of the exile, which was 587 BC, after the fall of Jerusalem, right? 587. Okay. Time of distress and despair for Israel. They were carried off, right? Okay. And they felt like they'd been abandoned by God. So this is where the Israelites are at. And like I said in my previous sermon, Isaiah's message is constantly reiterating to Israel, fear not, during this time of trouble and distress for the nation. So within this section, we're going to see a few things. We're going to see the anticipation of the rise of Cyrus the Great. Okay, so we'll find that in these chapters. And he was a Persian king who conquered Babylon, 539 BC. All right, and of course you remember the writing on the wall in Daniel. I actually have a poster of the image Daniel sees as well. You guys remember this? Okay, Nebuchadnezzar, thou art that head of gold, right? Arms and shoulders, the Medes, thighs and legs, Persia, and of course the feet is clay and mystery Babylon as we know it, right? Is that correct? The spiritual successor. And of course we see in the image the stone breaks the image as a whole. So all of those empires are still with us. Maybe not physically, but in their spiritual forms, correct? It culminates into a concept known as mystery Babylon, end-time world power. All right, so anyway, the fact that Cyrus would come in and conquer is part of that vision of the statue. And of course, Cyrus would allow the exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild. And who went down? Ezra and Nehemiah, the high priest, right? They went down and did, okay. And of course, that restores to Israel their identity as a nation. Okay, that's what it did. You think about this in terms of our nation needing the healing like that. Let's keep that in mind as we go through these chapters, all right? And lastly, of course, the chapters before this, Isaiah chapter 1 through 39, those chapters are mainly concerned with judgment and warning. Okay, and we'll see that if you read through those, you'll see that Israel is being, the controversy brought against national Israel from God is that their disobedience, and of course they turned to idol worship. Okay, and then the departure from that begins here in chapter 40, which is a message to Israel about God's compassion, a message to Israel about the future plans God has for them concerning restoration and salvation. There's a huge part of salvation communicated in these chapters. So this section of Isaiah is, from the earlier sections, is a transition in tone. Okay, that's why it's marked off as second Isaiah, because it's a departure from what we had read earlier. The section of Scripture now, this section can be divided into several major themes and subunits, which we're going to work on today. And we're going to try to get to a few very quickly, so I would encourage you to take notes. Because the passages that we will look at do not cover the entire section. So this would be an excellent time for you guys to do independent study on these chapters from this week to next. And if you want a little boost, I would highly suggest reading Howard Rand's study in Isaiah, or at least, you don't have to read the whole thing, but in a week. But what I would do is, he goes through it just like in the books. Chapter 1, 2, 3, he goes right through it just like the book of Isaiah. So if you were to find this section within this book, which I've looked up, it's spot on. So studying Isaiah, any Howard Rand like that is excellent, of course. All right, so what was that? Oh yes, it's easy to read. It's not a dissertation. It doesn't read like a college textbook. It reads very well. So as far as studies go, that's a faster read, a more enjoyable read too, because faster read gets around to some dry materials. And I try to keep you guys from having to read. That's why you pay me the big bucks to read all the stuff nobody wants to read. All right? But we all read the Bible, so that's good. All right, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 11, and we're not going to read them all. But we're going to, if you see, as we go through these chapters, you'll notice two general themes throughout all of these scriptures. Generally speaking, it's the sovereignty of God and the reassurance to Israel from God of their redemption. Okay, that's what makes these chapters different from the rest of Isaiah. All right, so let's look at chapter 40, verse 1 and 2 actually sets the tone quite well. So Isaiah 40, verses 1 and 2. Comfort ye, my people. Notice, right off the bat, we've got comfort. That Israel is, the word comfort is being declared upon Israel. You see this? So right off the bat, we see that this would set the tone for the section. Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her that her warfare is accomplished, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Now you'll notice, double for all her sins, received double. That sounds like Mystery Babylon too, right? For transgression. This has, if you understand Bible law, restitution. It's the law of restitution right there. It's usually skipped or left out. Okay? So we see here God is announcing the end of punishment for Israel. In this case, the exile, right? All right, and if you read through verse 11 at least, you'll see a proclamation for a preparation of a way for God to return. That's the verses that John quoted, right? John the Baptist. Prepare ye the way. We'll also see that God is depicted as a tender shepherd looking after his flock. Okay, all words of reassurance to Israel. So if you think about it now, I'm not saying for Americans, Christian kingdom believers within America or the world over, I'm not saying that our punishment is ended. What I'm saying is that we have suffered as God told us we would, but he also reassures us that he has future plans of greatness for his people and that he still looks after us as a shepherd does his flock. You see, so always keep in mind these are double prophecies that can relate to old Israel and of course ourselves in this age. We'll go through that more and more as we see who Cyrus is or who he could be personified as in our modern day. So let's look at Isaiah chapter 40, verses 12 through 31. So I'm just going to summarize these for you. In this section, found within Isaiah, God emphasizes his supremacy, wisdom, and strength, right? And of course, he contrasts that, as you'll notice if you read the verses, to human limitations. And of course, once again, he asserts to us the futility of idols and idol worship. A few key themes can be found here. One, God always asserts his infinite power as the creator and his power over his creation. Okay, and he reiterates that quite a few times throughout the Bible. You don't have to go very far at all. So Isaiah 40, verse 12 does a good job at that. Who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with a span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Okay. So, God's saying what? In this verse, actually, from 12 through verse 17, we see God's immense power being highlighted, right? Okay, and here in verse 12, we see that God is effortlessly measuring things that would be impossible for man to do. The heavens, the mountains, things like that. Therefore, what we have to understand is God's power, God's wisdom, our power and our wisdom cannot compare to God's. That's a lot of what Isaiah is doing right now. Of course, verses 18 through 26 in chapter 40 illustrates once again, and it reiterates a lot of things. It repeats a lot of times, so we're not going over every verse. Again, 18 through 26 in Isaiah 40 go over the futility of idols, once again. And they compare the idols to the living God. Okay? And obviously there's no comparison. And again, God's power is shown in verse 22. So here's an interesting one. Isaiah 40, verse 22. It is he, God of course, that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. All right. Because God is an all-powerful creator, no man-made image can compare to him. That's what Isaiah was saying. And God is eternal, and he rules the universe. Right? It's all what Isaiah is communicating to us. And of course, before we move on from this verse, we must further discuss it. Can anyone think of a reason why? We have to look at this one a little closer. Martha? Ah, right. Yes, of course. This verse is usually used to support the flat earth theory. Correct? Has anyone seen it used that way? Okay. Yet, this verse simply does not support that view. In spite of whoever told you, or however long you've been led to believe it. Okay? This word circle is what throws everyone off. I know you've heard these arguments. Circle, Hebrew number 2329. Chug, circle, circuit, something round or encompassing. Later on in the Bible, you'll see it used as a word to mean complete. Okay? Actually, this word circle, I didn't go for it in this sermon, but there is a verse in Job that uses the same word for vault. The vault of the heavens God is seen walking around in. Vault gives us a more 3D image, I think. Anyway, that word circle is used for the word vault as well. I skipped that, but I just remembered. So the word does not mean flat disc, you see, or it refers to roundness in a general sense. Okay, as a matter of fact, if you drop the 9 here and you go to the root 232, it actually means something around you, like belt or girdle. Okay, so round in a general sense. Well, and this is what I've been told, and I'm sure you have too. Well, Pastor Reed, if Isaiah meant sphere, he would have said sphere, not circle. Right? Well, that's a false assumption. Ancient Hebrew does not have a precise word for sphere, like our modern languages do. However, there are precise words for flat surface, or a flat plane in the ancient Hebrew. So, if Isaiah meant flat plane, he would have said flat plane. But since there was no sphere word found in ancient Hebrew. He used general roundness, okay? Because flat disk or flat circle was not intended here. You see? It was not. Now, there's another one that always gets brought up on this with the circle. You have to have two witnesses. They're like, well, what about Proverbs 8:27? We know that one, right? Okay, Proverbs 8:27. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, that's the one. That's the one that seals the deal for him. So I know that one word, compass, throws everything I just said out, right? But are all compasses flat discs? Okay, let's think about this. Here's a flat compass, right? We all seen those? Land nav, okay. Mostly used for standard navigation, easily portable, and not difficult to read, right? Okay. Dome compass. You see these often in marine and aviation, right? Because they're easily visible from all angles, right? And it accommodates movements in various planes while on a plane, right? And then, of course, we have the ball compass. I actually have one of these in my pickup truck. It floats. So even if the surface it's mounted on is unlevel, it's still accurate, right? Okay. So compass means Proverbs 8:27 proves the earth is flat because the word compass is in there. Very well. We have a flat compass for the flat earth. We have a dome compass for the dome earth. And we have a sphere for the sphere of the earth, right? All right, I agree. Fine, it can mean compass, but that doesn't mean it's a flat earth. And those are UFOs. I'm fairly good at Photoshop. All right. So, not at all. Compass does not mean flat disk, okay? Well, Pastor Reed, if we're going to go with the context, let's stick with context then, because we're going to have to stick to the compass that Solomon was familiar with at the time of the writing, right? Obviously, he didn't know about dome compasses or spheres. He didn't have gyroscopes, did he? Not yet. So we're going to have to go with the one Solomon was familiar with then, because that's what he was writing about. That's what he meant. That was the intent, to show us that the earth is a flat frisbee hurling through space, right? All right. At the time of King Solomon's writing, there were no magnetic compasses in existence. Okay? None. Instead, people relied on astronomy, geography, wind patterns, and oral traditions for navigation. So Solomon wasn't talking about any of these. They didn't exist yet. All right? The time period for the writing of Proverbs, by the way, which is where that verse came from, was the 10th century to 6th century BC. The first compass was first put into use in China during the Han Dynasty, which ranged from 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD, you see. Solomon's writings predate the actual appearance of a compass that's used for navigation, all right? So if Solomon wrote Proverbs in 10 to 6th century BC, and this is the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD, what is the average time? Give me the mean, the range. Can you do those? I've done the math for you. All right. The gap between the time of Solomon and the first known use of the magnetic compass here, and you've done all the ranges, okay? So, depending on the specific start and end points of this time period, Solomon predates any compass from 400 to 1200 years, okay? Depending on where you start and stop. And yes, I know, sundials were in existence and they are flat. I know. Sundials tell time. Okay. But I know, the reason I bring that up is people tell me, well, Reed, they do establish a cardinal direction. You're correct. You're correct, right? And the Bible's full of cardinal directions, east, west, north, south, right? Kings from the east, far from the east and the west, right? But finding a cardinal direction is only a concept within navigation, all right, just so you guys know. So very simply, Sundials don't prove the earth is flat either, because it just tells you a cardinal direction, and that would be the difference between orientation and actual movement towards a specific goal or destination. So it's not apples to apples, really. All right, I hate to burst your bubble. Don't bring up a sundial. Now, if that isn't enough to convince you, Proverbs 8:27 doesn't support a flat earth view. Okay, because we had this definition. This word compass, as used in 8:27 in Proverbs, is the same root word as circle. So that you could replace the word compass with the word circle, vice versa, because it's the same word. 2329 from the Hebrew. Okay? So, the word circle in Isaiah 40:22 is the same word as compass in Proverbs 8:27. So let's go back to Isaiah 40:22 and look. Once again, Isaiah is not describing a flat earth. Why? Why? Well, let's look at it. It's very simple. It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth. We're going to stop there. God is depicted as what? A ruler seated above the world, right? And that communicates to us what? As it emphasizes to us his dominion and his authority over all creation. Does it not? Okay. And of course, it relates to us God's transcendence. So he's above. So in other words, he's above human affairs and he oversees everything. Correct? Okay. And once again, the word circle suggests the earth's roundness and by extension, its completeness. You see, it is finite, completely under God's control. Okay? All right. So this statement then is poetic, right? Uses imagery and symbolism. Okay? But I'm going to need more witnesses than that. The inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers. Now, we know this is not talking about human grasshoppers because the Bible wasn't written to grasshoppers because everybody knows grasshoppers can't read. So, by comparing humans to grasshoppers, what's happening here? We see how small and we really are compared to God's power and greatness, right? Now, you think about the themes we've already talked about God having power over his creation. All the verses that have come before this and after this assume the same exact format, you see? And as a matter of fact, the grasshoppers thing it's not really that out of place. Remember Numbers 13? They sent some scouts out. What did they tell? What was in the report when they came back after seeing the Canaanites? We would be as grasshoppers to them, right? Which was what? They weren't literally saying Joshua and his brigade were grasshoppers, were they? Or they were able to eat grass or hop up. They were saying, they were relaying a sense of insignificance and weakness when compared to the giants of the land, right? Okay, same thing here. So once again, this statement follows suit with the previous one. God sitting upon the circle, employing imagery, metaphorical language, all right? Here it says, it stretches out the heavens as a curtain. In other versions, in other translations, that word curtain can be translated canopy. Canopy, okay? So, the very heavens, along with all their marvels and wonders, are part of God's divine craftsmanship. Is that what that's relaying to us? So God as the creator is portrayed as the one who shapes the universe, just as a tent maker would stretch out fabric. Right? Okay. Again, more and more symbolism as we go along. Spreads what? Not the grasshopper people. Spreads them, the heavens, out as a tent to dwell in. Right? You see that? Not only are the heavens designed by God, they serve a purpose. They were carefully constructed by him for our sustainment and habitation. You see? That's what this verse is communicating to us, relating once again metaphorical language, and of course, the order and structure of God's creation. You see, this verse is all about those things. So this verse in its entirety is symbolic, right? It's poetic. the prophet Isaiah is not making a scientific statement here, is he? Is he presenting a scientific claim? No. Is he formulating a scientific hypothesis? No. He's using imagery to convey God's sovereignty, human significance, and creation as God's work alone. You see? This follows, like I said, right along with the entire text of Isaiah 40 and a few more chapters. This cannot or should not be taken literally, okay? Because you see what I've done. If this is a scientific statement from the prophet Isaiah that the earth is indeed flat, then the earth is indeed full of grasshopper people, and on down through the verse. You see, you cannot just pick one part of a symbolic verse and make it literal. That is the out of context trap. You'll see that a lot in other visions, especially prophetic visions. And really where it gets messed up more often than not is Revelation. Well, they'll have these literal events happening in Revelation, but they'll leave out the other symbolic language. And I always tell people, I remind them, if you take verses in the prophetic language found in Revelation literally, then you will have to have mountains and islands getting up and walking around. We'll actually have to be on the lookout of a giant red beast and a woman riding on it, and then it just becomes absurd, right? Taken as poetic imagery, this makes perfect sense when aligned with the context of the entire verse. You see, that's how we study the Bible. That's how we know the things about the Bible we know. All right? But if we take this verse literally, because it must follow suit then, it's either all symbolism or none of it is, right? Then we have a giant throne floating in space with God regally sitting above a perfectly flat circle earth that looks like a giant frisbee spinning through the cosmos with grasshopper people skittering around on it, right? Meanwhile, God casually unrolls the sky like a giant Coleman 6-person tent and hammers stakes in so it doesn't fly away in the galactic breeze, right? This is all literal. And us grasshoppers, of course, are frantically trying to measure the curvature of the tent fabric. Right? This is where we're going. Of course, we have thinking grasshoppers like we do now, philosophers who are doubting they're even insects at all. And then, of course, the other grasshoppers on earth would be the alternative fact analysts, known as conspirahoppers, who object the official narrative that God exists at all. You see? So, maybe it looks like this. Taken literally, if this is indeed proves that this is scientific fact and statement from the prophet Isaiah, then we're left with this. And you see we have God on a throne floating above a flat disk earth, grasshopper people looking on, and then of course we've got the angels hammering in the celestial tent of the heavens. And you can see this angel's having a little trouble with his end, so he might have to ask for the celestial hammer from Gabriel because his end is sagging. You know. Now I'm just using humor to illustrate the absurdity of relating something like Isaiah 40:22 literally. Literally. And I constantly remind people that when you do have a literal interpretation, it must follow suit. And the more and more you tell them that these things cannot be actual events or actual things we should be on the lookout for, they start to, okay, then that's correct, Reed. And the thing is that you must follow the context of the verse. And I'll say they do make some fairly convincing arguments. But it's our job to check those arguments. Okay? So, that was meant as poetic imagery, not a literal cosmos camping trip. Okay? Isaiah 40:12 through 31 we'll look at. Now, we were looking at the verses in Isaiah chapter 40, and we saw in chapter 40, verse 22, that they emphasize God as the creator and sustainer of the universe because he's all powerful. You see, that's what those verses were communicating to us. And these verses here communicate to Israel that God does not grow weary. Okay? Isaiah also informs Israel that they should be reassured because of God's strength in his nature, and also it states to Israel that God will give power and strength to the weak. Okay? So these are words of reassurance to Israel. All right, so moving on to Isaiah 41 now, verses 1 through 7. Very quickly, these verses here in this section involve God's call to Cyrus. Okay? However, throughout the chapter, God also asserts once again his sovereignty over nations, and he reassures Israel of his greatness and the fruitlessness of idol worship once again. You see, there's a lot of repeats. Okay? Repetition. Let's look at Isaiah 41:2. All right? Who raised up the righteous man from the east, called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings. He gave them as the dust to his sword, and as driven stubble to his bow. Who is this talking about? Who's the king from the east? Cyrus, okay? So, it's likely this is Cyrus the Great, right? And here we see that God stirs up rulers in order to see his divine plan done, right? And then we always keep that in mind. Again, declaring God's sovereignty. And if we look back on this and see that this actually happened, we understand that God controls history, right? Okay, we have historical facts proving this. That's what's important. Now, if you actually skip to chapter 45, you'll see more mentioned concerning Cyrus. So Isaiah 45:1, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. Okay, so here, Cyrus is identified as a chosen instrument to deliver Israel. You see this? Okay, and Cyrus is a ruler. This word anointed is very interesting, though. You ever looked this one up? All right, anointed. Hebrew 4899, Mashiach, anointed one, Messiah, a consecrated person or set aside for a specific or divine purpose, right? A Messiah. Cyrus is, thus saith the Lord to his Messiah, to Cyrus, to his consecrated one, to the appointed one, to him who God has plans for, right? You see that? That's interesting. Are there any rulers of today that if you mention positives about them, you're accused of holding them up as a Messiah? Anybody heard that? Okay. Well, yeah, right. Well, now you don't have to get all bent out of shape or backpedal when somebody tells you that. Just say he's being used of God. And you know that's right because you know you're Hebrew. Right? Now, am I saying Trump is a Jesus? No. No, that's the Messiah, or Messiah with a capital M, okay? I'm saying that he's been selected and is being used by God for divine purposes. That makes him one who is anointed, or one who is consecrated, right? Now that's fine, isn't it? So, and by the way, when I say that, they're the ones that brought up Messiah, not me. And Hebrew number 4899 includes that, so that's okay. All right? So it's not a bad thing. Why? Because just as with Cyrus, God demonstrates his control by raising up rulers in order to achieve his purposes. Right? Nothing wrong with saying Trump could be one of those men. And if God's in control, and if God's got a plan, it's all going to plan. All right? So relax a little bit. Somebody says you're holding up Trump as a Messiah. Be like, well, yes, he is one who's been anointed. Look it up. Strong's 4899. Okay? So that'll help you. Now we're going to begin to close here. Isaiah 42, verses 1 through 25 is the section we'll be looking at next. And like I said, we are going over the entirety of these chapters very quickly because most of the themes repeat themselves. And I just wanted you to have an overall idea of what these verses are about. Now, there is a whole lot of things going on in chapter 42, okay? Once again, we are presented that God alone is supreme and that idols are worthless. And here, national Israel's disobedience has led to suffering, right? And yet God still calls to them. He tells them to listen to him and to return to him. Okay, that's what's going on in these verses. And of course, this is always, when you understand who the Israel people, who the people of the book are, these messages are always directed to us as well. Because we too, in this age, can be reassured of God's faithfulness even when we stumble, falter, fail. Okay, we are His covenant people. It's a great comfort to us too. Isaiah 42 verses 1 through 9. These are where we're going to end today. And I'll actually read these because I want you to see what's going on here. Isaiah 42 verse 1. Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles, or to the nations. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and a smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto the truth. He shall not fail, nor be discouraged, till he have set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law. Thus saith God the Lord, He hath that created the heavens and stretched them out, He that spreads forth the earth, and He that cometh out of it, He that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walketh therein. I, the Lord, have called thee in righteousness, and I will hold thine hand. Who has He called in righteousness? The servant, whoever this servant is, and will keep thee and give thee for a covenant of the people and for a light of the Gentiles, once again nations, to open the blind eyes, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, and them that sit in the darkness out of the prison house. I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to graven images. Behold, the former things are come to pass, and the new things I do declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. Okay, so prophecy, of course, lets us know God is God. History tells us God is God. And that's what He's saying here. And you see, we're continuing with the themes we've been looking at this morning in the earlier chapters. God is supreme. God is in power. Idol worship is, of course, forbidden, but it's also fruitless. And that Israel should turn and look to God. He will do these things. And we do see some end-of-the-age kingdom language here as well, if you recognize that. We'll get into that later. So, Isaiah 42:1 says, Behold my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him, and he shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. All right, this servant appears in what is called the servant songs in Isaiah, of which there are 4. Okay, so this is the first mention of the servant here, in the servant songs at least. Okay, now what scholars have done, they have separated the servant songs, which are found throughout Isaiah chapter 49 through 53. And there's 4 songs within those chapters. The problem is if scholars have identified this as one entity. Okay, so it gets very confusing. But we've seen servant throughout the book of Isaiah. So why now is it different? Right? Okay. It's this servant then is a mysterious figure or entity. And it has been identified and interpreted in many different ways. The servant is a central figure in the later chapters of Isaiah, and he appears in key passages. This is very important we understand who this is. So next week, we're going to take a very detailed look at this servant and determine its identity. And its identity is possible. Is it possible it is a corporate identity or a individual identity? Okay, that's what we're going to start looking at because it's a fascinating subject. Fascinating. Of course, it implicates God's plan for the end of the age and His plan of salvation. That's why it's important. It's not studied that way. So your homework then, you've had 2 weeks off. Your homework is read Isaiah chapters 49 and 50 and pay close attention to the servant songs, which are found throughout those. I don't know if your Bible will delineate those. But read these chapters and pay close attention to the servant mentioned throughout. And then let me know what you think it is, who it is, what its function is. Does this implicate end-time prophecy? Does this implicate national Israel? Is this global salvation, universalism, or just God's plan for the ages? Right? Yeah, do that for me and see what you come up with. That's all we have for today.